So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. In the somber spring of 1502, as Ludlow's chill lingered in the air of Greenwich Palace, Eliza, Queen of England, sat by a firelit window, her fingers tracing the edge of a locket engraved with Arthur's name, her eldest son. At 36, her delicate features bore the weight of a mother's grief. The chamber, warmed by cedar logs and scented with the faint lavender from the rushes, held tapestries of roses and saints that flickered in the firelight, their silent heraldry a reminder of the Tudor legacy, now fractured by loss. Arthur Tudor, just 15, had been the Tudor heir, his marriage to Catherine of Aragon a beacon of hope, extinguished by the sweating sickness in April. The news from Ludlow, where he had died beside his young bride, struck Eliza like a blade, her heart hollowed by the memory of his scholarly poise and gentle smile, so like her lost brother's. Among her ladies, Elizabeth Boleyn, now 21, and a steadfast lady-in-waiting, and Agnes Howard, a 24-year-old, newly back at court and newly married to Elizabeth Boleyn's 59-year-old father. And now they were co-workers. Eliza's days wove mourning with duty, her love for her surviving children a light in the court-shadowed halls. In the nursery, she soothed Meg's quiet tears for Arthur, guided 10-year-old Henry's bold recitations to mask his confusion, and cradled 6-year-old Mary, whose chatter eased her pain. Each moment was a faint echo of the sorrow consuming her heart. King Henry, his face etched with resolve, came to her chamber, his hand resting on hers. "We will endure, my love," he murmured, speaking of young Harry as the new heir, his voice a shield against despair. Eliza, eyes brimming, nodded, drawing strength from him. That night she found him in the chapel, his stoic facade crumbling as he knelt, shoulders shaking with sobs for Arthur. Her soft steps echoed on the stone as she knelt beside him, her hand on his back, whispering, "We will bear this together, my king." Their tears mingled, their love a fragile anchor. Margaret Beaufort, her lady mother-in-law, orchestrated the court's response, her stern prayers a shield against despair, while Eliza corresponded with her cousin, Maggie Pole. Maggie's letter offered condolences, and Eliza, with Elizabeth Boleyn gently preparing her quill, replied with gratitude, her words cautious but distant, yet warm, binding their Yorkist hearts in a court wary of their bond. In the palace chapel, where incense curled and stained glass glowed, Eliza prayed for Arthur's soul. Elizabeth Boleyn, lighting a candle nearby, stood as a quiet pillar, her presence and tales of young Mary and Anne a soft reminder of hope, anchoring Eliza's resolve to protect her children and the Tudor legacy through a storm of grief. In the somber chill of April 1502, Lady Margaret Beaufort, my lady, the king's mother, stood in a candlelit chamber of Richmond Palace, her sharp eyes scanning the parchment spread across the oak table, its red wax seals gleaming like blood in the flickering light. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and damp stone, the Thames beyond the leaded windows murmuring in a restless dirge. At 59, Margaret's hands were gnarled but steady. They traced the terms of the proxy marriage contract for her granddaughter, Princess Meg, a girl of 12, whose betrothal to King James IV of Scotland was now a linchpin in England's fragile peace. The ink was barely dry, yet the weight of Arthur's death hung over the chamber like a shroud, sharpening Margaret's resolve to bind the Tudor dynasty to stability. Richmond Palace, a monument to Henry's triumph, was cloaked in mourning. Arthur's death at 15 had shattered the court. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon, barely 6 months old, now a broken thread in the Anglo-Spanish alliance. The king, Margaret's son, paced his privy chamber, his lean face hollowed by grief, his voice low as he questioned envoys about Spain's intentions. Queen Eliza moved through her days like a ghost. Her golden hair dulled, her smiles rare since the news from Ludlow. Yet Margaret, ever the architect of survival, saw opportunity in sorrow. A marriage between Meg and King James, a man of 30, would secure England's northern border, tempering Scotland's raids and France's ambitions. The proxy ceremony, to be held soon, was her design, a step toward a treaty that might one day unite the crowns. Margaret summoned Meg, her granddaughter, to prepare for the role she must play. The girl entered, her small frame swathed in a kirtle of deep blue, her copper curls pinned beneath the velvet hood, her green eyes wide but wary, shadowed by the court's grief. Meg, spirited and quick, had wept for Arthur, her solemn brother, whose Latin verses and gentle smiles were now merely memories. She curtsied, her movements practiced, though her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve, a child's gesture in a world of crowns. Margaret's stern gaze softened, seeing in Meg the fire of her own youth, tempered by Tudor duty. The court's rhythm, muted by mourning, stirred with preparations. In a side chamber, Margaret conferred with her son's counselors, their voices hushed as they drafted the marriage terms. Margaret, unyielding, insisting on clauses to protect Meg's rights, her memory of her own precarious youth fueling her vigilance. She recalled her own marriage at 12, the pain of childbirth at 13, and vowed that her granddaughter would fare better, her faith in God's plan a shield against doubt. At night, in her private oratory, she knelt before a silver crucifix, her prayers fervent for Meg's safety, for Henry's dynasty, and for Arthur's soul. The proxy ceremony was set for a small chapel within Richmond, its walls adorned with frescoes of saints. Margaret oversaw every detail: a velvet canopy for Meg, a ring blessed by the Bishop of London, and a Scottish envoy, Patrick Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, to speak James' vows in his place. She ensured that Meg's gown would dazzle, a symbol of England's strength. Yet as she watched Meg rehearse her part, her small voice repeating Latin phrases, Margaret's heart tightened, a rare flicker of doubt piercing her resolve. She remembered her own son, Henry, a babe in exile, and prayed Meg would find kindness in Scotland's court, not the strife she had known. In the damp summer of 1502, Anne Boleyn, just 1 year old, lay in a cradle within the stone and timber walls of Blickling Hall, her tiny form swaddled in soft linens. The air carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, mingling with the warmth of the manor's great hall, where fires crackled and servants moved quietly, their footsteps echoing on the flagged floor. Mary, her sister, toddled nearby, her curious eyes fixed on the baby, her small hands clutching a wooden toy. Anne was too young to grasp the world. She stirred faintly as adult voices drifted above her. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, a rising courtier and diplomat in King Henry's service, had returned from his mission to the Low Countries. His tales of Margaret of Austria's court lost on the infant, but vivid in the household's hum. As an envoy who had aided in Prince Arthur's proxy marriage in 1501, Thomas's ambition cast a quiet glow, his talk of diplomacy and favor at court filling the air. Elizabeth, Anne's mother and devoted lady-in-waiting to Queen Eliza, cradled her daughter with a gentle touch, her embroidery set aside as she hummed softly, her beauty softened by firelight. Whispers of Princess Margaret's proxy marriage to King James of Scotland, set for January, reached the hall, a distant tale of a young princess that meant little to Mary, let alone Anne. More immediate was the news of Queen Eliza's confinement. The court awaited a new Tudor child. Elizabeth Boleyn's voice carried a tender hope for the queen, praying the babe would ease the sting of Arthur's loss, though Anne, in her cradle, knew only the warmth of her mother's arms. At night, as rushlights flickered and the wind rattled Blickling's casements, Thomas spoke of grand plans, perhaps sending his daughters to a foreign court one day, his diplomatic ties opening doors. Elizabeth, her gaze on Anne's sleeping form and Mary's restless curls, nodded, her heart torn between courtly duty and a quiet wish to keep her girls close. In autumn 1502, Dr. Rodrigo de Puebla, the Spanish ambassador, meets daily with the English council to negotiate terms for the betrothal shift, focusing on dowry retention and alliance continuity. In the somber autumn of 1502, Catherine of Aragon, newly widowed at 16, stood in the shadowed chambers of Durham House, her temporary refuge in London. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and myrrh, the flicker of candles casting light on the tapestries of biblical scenes that adorn the stone walls. Catherine held a small prayer book, its pages worn from fervent devotions. Her auburn hair, once a crown of Spanish pride, tucked beneath a gabled hood, and her blue eyes, once bright with hope, now carried the weight of grief and uncertainty. The death of her husband, Prince Arthur, in April 1502, had shattered the dreams that had brought her from Castile to England, leaving her a princess without a prince, without a purpose in a foreign land. Durham House, a grand but cold residence on the Strand, hummed with the quiet steps of her Spanish ladies, Doña Elvira Manuel and Maria de Salinas, whose whispers in Castilian were soothing to Catherine's heart. Yet the court of King Henry VII, her father-in-law, felt distant, its intrigues cloaked in English reserve. Arthur's death at Ludlow Castle, after only 5 months of marriage, had left Catherine stranded, her dowry only half paid and her future uncertain. She knelt before a small altar, praying to the Virgin for guidance, her rosary beads clicking softly. Her thoughts often drifted to Arthur, his shy smile, his gentle voice practicing Latin with her, their brief moments of companionship, cut short by fever. She wondered if she had failed him, or if God had other plans for her in this damp northern kingdom. The court's attention by late 1502 turned to Princess Meg's betrothal to King James of Scotland. Catherine was invited to Richmond Palace for the ceremony. She observed the preparations with a heavy heart. Meg was a girl of 12, her copper curls and bright eyes a contrast to Catherine's somber demeanor. Catherine stood amongst the courtiers, her black gown stark against the cloth of gold canopy where Meg stood, small but poised, reciting vows to the Earl of Bothwell, James Proxy. The ruby ring slipped onto Meg's finger gleamed like a promise, and Catherine felt a pang remembering her own wedding to Arthur, the hope it had carried, now ashes. Meg's youth stirred Catherine's memories of her own journey to England, a princess of 15, sent to forge alliances. She admired Meg's courage, though she saw the little girl's unease in her tight smile, her glances to Queen Eliza, whose own grief for Arthur shadowed her gentle face. Catherine, too, missed Eliza's warmth, the Queen's kind words in halting Spanish during her early days at court. The talk of Meg's future in Scotland made her wonder about her own fate. Would she return to Spain, a widowed princess, or remain a pawn in Henry's chess game? Rumors swirled of a possible betrothal to Prince Henry, Arthur's younger brother, still only 11. He was too young, and Catherine's pride as Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter recoiled at the uncertainty. In her chambers, Catherine wrote letters to her parents in Castile, her quill scratching parchment by candlelight, pleading for clarity on her dowry and her status. The Thames, visible through the window, flowed gray and restless, much like her thoughts. She attended Mass daily, finding solace in the familiar Latin, and embroidered with her ladies, her needlework meticulous, a discipline to steady her heart. The court's cautious hope for Meg's marriage, a step toward peace, contrasted with Catherine's private fears of being forgotten or failing her parents' legacy. Yet her faith, forged in the devout courts of Aragon, held firm. She prayed for Meg, for Eliza, for a path forward. In the frosty twilight of January 25, 1503, 13-year-old Princess Meg stood in a small chapel of Richmond Palace, her heart fluttering like a caged bird beneath a crimson gown, embroidered with silver roses. Today she would be bound by proxy to King James IV of Scotland, a man of 30 that she had never met, in a ceremony that would make her a queen in waiting, and seal a peace between England's roses and Scotland's thistles. Richmond Palace, a tapestry of Tudor splendor, hummed with quiet purpose. The chapel was intimate, its stone floor warmed by a brazier, its altar adorned with a silver crucifix that gleamed under candlelight. Meg stood beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, her small hands clutching the prayer book, its gilt edges worn from years of use, a gift from her lady grandmother, who now stood nearby, her black gown and gabled hood lending her the air of a sentinel. Lady Margaret's face, lined with the weight of her son's crown, softened as she glanced at Meg, her pride tempered by a flicker of concern for the girl she had shaped through prayers and lessons. The Earl of Bothwell, a Scottish envoy with a weathered face and a voice that rolled like thunder, stood as James' proxy. He knelt before Meg, his voice steady as he recited the vows in Latin, pledging James' faith and love. Meg, her own voice, small but clear, repeated her part, her words rehearsed under her tutor's watchful eye. The ring, a band of gold set with a ruby, was slipped onto her child-sized finger, its weight unfamiliar, a symbol of a husband far across the border. No one could know that in 62 years, this Earl of Bothwell's great-grandson James would marry this princess's granddaughter, Mary, Queen of Scots, creating quite the scandal. At the proxy wedding, Meg glanced at her mother, seeking her smile, and found it, gentle but tinged with sorrow that Meg could not fully grasp. The ceremony was brief, its solemnity broken by a soft hymn from the choir, their voices rising like a prayer for peace. Meg's thoughts wandered, picturing Scotland, a land of rugged moors and stone castles, its king a figure from her grandmother's tales, learned and gallant, yet fierce in battle. She wondered if James would like her laughter, if he would teach her to dance, as her father had, or if his court would echo with the warmth of Richmond's halls. The weight of her new title, Queen of Scots, settled on her, a crown she could not yet wear, for now she would remain in England until she was older, perhaps 2 years or more. After the vows, the court gathered in the great hall, its tapestry of York and Lancaster roses glowing under torchlight. A modest banquet, marked for the occasion. Meg sat beside her parents, her ring glinting as she sipped spiced wine, its warmth steadying her nerves. She felt grown. King Henry, his voice low, spoke of Scotland's promise, of a peace that might outlast his reign. Her brother, Henry, now 11, and the Prince of Wales, strutted nearby, his fiery curls bouncing as he boasted of his archery to a page, his bravado masking his grief for his brother Arthur. Meg caught his eye, and he grinned, a boyish spark that reminded her of their games in Greenwich's gardens. Little Mary, 6, whirled in her kirtle, her giggles drawing smiles from the lords, a fleeting joy in a court still raw. Catherine, Arthur's widow, sat quietly, her gown a mirror of loss, her presence a reminder of Spain's alliance now uncertain. Meg, glancing at her sister-in-law, felt a pang, wondering if Catherine's heart, like hers, wrestled with duty and dreams. At night, in her chamber overlooking the Thames, Meg knelt before a small virgin statue, its candlelight dancing on the walls, the river's murmur wove through her prayers, and Richmond's bells tolled softly, a hymn for peace. She prayed for Arthur, for her parents, for the strength to be a queen. In the chill of early February 1503, Mary Tudor, a spirited 6-year-old, flitted through the corridors of Richmond Palace, her small feet pattering the rush-strewn floors. Clad in a dress of green damask, she clutched a wooden doll, its painted face a mirror of her own. The palace, alive with the hum of servants and the clink of goblets, buzzed with anticipation. For Eliza's confinement, for the promise of a new sibling. Yet Mary's thoughts, as she paused by a frost-kissed window, were tangled with her sister Meg's recent proxy marriage, a ceremony that had draped their family in both pride and quiet unease. In the great hall, where logs crackled in the hearth, Mary sat with her brother Henry, now 11, his boisterous energy filling the space. He spoke of hawks and swords, but Mary, nibbling on a marzipan sweet, thought of Meg's new title, Queen of Scots, and wondered if the crown was very heavy. She imagined her lady mother laboring soon and hoped the babe would bring joy, not more sorrow. The Thames glittered beyond the windows, the ripples catching the torchlight, and Mary, clutching her doll, felt a flicker of courage. She would be brave, like Meg, like her mother, a Tudor princess in a world of shifting tides. In the bleak chill of February 1503, Maggie Pole stood in the quiet of her modest chambers. At 29, her fair face bore the lines of a life marked by loss and resilience. The castle, a sturdy keep surrounded by frost-dusted fields, was far from the grandeur of the Tudor court, yet its stone walls held the warmth of a hearth where a fire crackled, casting shadows on tapestries faded by time. Maggie, clad in a gown of somber blue wool, gazed out a narrow window, her thoughts heavy with the news from Richmond Palace. Queen Eliza, her cousin and friend, was nearing her confinement, the court awaiting a new Tudor child. The air smelled of beeswax and dried herbs, a comfort against the winter's bite. Maggie's fingers traced the worn beads of her rosary, a gift from her late mother, Isabel Neville. Her heart, ever tethered to the Plantagenet blood that ran through her veins, was troubled by Eliza's state. At 37, the queen was older than most for childbearing, a fact that stirred whispers even in Maggie's distant household. Eliza, whose gentle laughter Maggie recalled from their youth at court, had borne 6 children, losing 3. The grief of that loss lingered, a wound Maggie understood too well, having buried her brother Edward, executed by Eliza's husband, King Henry. Maggie's own survival as a Plantagenet heiress was a delicate dance, her loyalty to the Tudors unquestioned, yet shadowed by her bloodline. The recent proxy marriage of Princess Meg to King James reached Maggie through letters from court acquaintances. She pictured young Meg, barely 13, standing in Richmond's chapel, her vows binding England to Scotland's wild north. Maggie, who had wed Sir Richard Pole at the king's behest, knew the weight of duty that shaped the girl's fate. She prayed for Meg, hoping the child queen would find strength in a foreign court, her innocence unmarred by the politics that had cost Maggie's family so dearly. Yet it was Eliza's health that haunted her most. Maggie had heard Eliza's strength was waning, her body taxed by grief and years of bearing heirs. In her small chapel, Maggie knelt before a wooden crucifix, the cold stone biting through her skirts. Her prayers were fervent. For Eliza's safe delivery, for the babe to live, for the Tudor line to hold against the specters of loss. Her own children slept in the nursery, their laughter her anchor. She thought of her husband Richard, loyal and steady, managing the king's lands in Wales, and felt a pang of gratitude for their quiet life, far from court intrigues. Yet Eliza's face, her soft eyes, her Yorkist beauty, lingered in Maggie's mind, a reminder of shared blood and shared burdens. The household was subdued, the servants moving softly as if mirroring Maggie's unease. Maggie, stirring a pot of pottage in the kitchen to ease her restless hands, wondered if a boy would ease Eliza's heart, or if the queen, like Maggie, feared the cost of ambition. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, and Maggie, wrapping her shawl tighter, felt the weight of her age and her losses, her father, her brother, her place at court, yet clung to faith. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.